The rope had cut so deep into Evangeline Ashford's wrists that she could no longer feel her fingers. Blood dripped down her palms in slow, dark rivulets, pooling in the frozen dirt beneath her boots. 3 days without food, 2 without water, and still she refused to beg. The December wind sliced through Silver Creek's town square like a blade drawn across bare skin. It was the kind of cold that settled into bones and made a home there, the kind that turned breath to ice crystals and made even the strongest men pull their coats tighter and hurry toward warm fires. But Evangeline Ashford didn't shiver. She stood tied to the wooden post in the center of the square, her body solid and strong despite the abuse it had endured. Despite the bruises that painted her face in shades of purple and green and sickly yellow. Despite the split lip that had barely begun to heal, the dried blood crusted at her temple, the rope burns that circled her wrists like grotesque bracelets. Her dark hair fell in tangled waves around her shoulders, wild and unkempt after 3 days exposed to the elements. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, stained with dirt and worse things she tried not to think about. She was larger than the other women tied beside her, larger than most women in Silver Creek. The kind of body that drew sneers and whispers from those who measured a woman's worth by the space she occupied. Fat cow, worthless sow, lucky anyone wanted you at all. The words had been hurled at her so many times over the years that they'd lost their sting. Or perhaps she'd simply grown numb to pain. After 8 years of Edmund's fists and 9 months of Sheriff Blackwood's torture, what were a few more insults? But her eyes. Her eyes burned with something that had nothing to do with fear or shame or the broken spirit of a condemned woman waiting to die. It was rage. Pure, undiluted fury that seemed to dare the entire town of Silver Creek to look away first, to blink, to show even a moment of doubt about the righteousness of what they were doing here. A man in the crowd spat toward her feet. The spittle landed in the dirt, freezing almost instantly. Eva's jaw tightened, but she said nothing, didn't flinch, didn't give him the satisfaction. A woman somewhere to her left shouted, "Murderer!" her voice shrill with righteous indignation. Eva's eyes found her in the crowd, held her gaze until the woman looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. They had been gathering since dawn, these good people of Silver Creek, Wyoming territory, drawn to the spectacle like moths to flame, like vultures to carrion. Men and women and even children pressed together on the frozen ground, their voices rising and falling in waves that sounded less like conversation and more like hunger. This was entertainment. This was justice. This was what happened to women who forgot their place in the natural order of things. 3 women stood tied to posts in the center of the square. 3 criminals, 3 lives, hanging in the balance. The first was elderly and frail, her thin body trembling with cold and fear. Her eyes were closed as if in prayer, lips moving soundlessly. She'd been caught stealing bread from the mercantile, bread to feed her grandchildren after her son had died and left them destitute. But hunger was no excuse for thievery, not in Silver Creek. The second was young, barely more than a girl, sobbing openly with her face pressed against the rough wood. 19 years old and found in a compromising position with a married man. Never mind that the man in question had pursued her relentlessly, had promised to leave his wife, had used every manipulation in his arsenal. She was the woman, therefore, she was the guilty party. And the third was Eva. She stood with her shoulders back and her chin raised, as if the ropes that bound her were nothing more than an inconvenience, as if the crowd that called for her blood was beneath her notice, as if she were a queen surveying peasants rather than a condemned woman awaiting her fate. Sheriff Cornelius Blackwood stepped onto the makeshift platform beside the posts. He was a handsome man by most accounts, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a high forehead and eyes the color of steel on a winter morning. He wore his badge pinned to a fine wool coat, polished to a high shine. His boots were expensive leather, barely touched by the mud that caked everyone else's footwear. He moved with the confidence of a man who had never been told no, who had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with his authority or his fists. His smile was wide and warm and didn't reach his eyes at all. Attention. His voice boomed across the square, rich and commanding. The crowd fell into eager silence, every face turning toward him like flowers toward the sun. "Attention, good people of Silver Creek!" He hooked his thumbs in his belt, surveying his domain with the satisfaction of a king reviewing his subjects. "I know you're all wondering what we're doing here today, and I'll tell you plain, because I've never been one to mince words or hide behind fancy language. These 3 women have been found guilty of various crimes against the good people of this territory." "Found guilty by who?" someone shouted from the back of the crowd. Blackwood's smile widened, showing teeth. "By me, by the evidence I've gathered, by common sense and basic human decency." No trial, Eva thought, no judge, no jury. Just Blackwood's word against theirs. Just his version of events, shaped and molded to serve his purposes. "The old woman there," Blackwood pointed casually, as if indicating merchandise at a general store. "She was caught red-handed, stealing bread from the mercantile. Theft is theft, regardless of the reason. We can't have people thinking they can just take what doesn't belong to them." A few people in the crowd nodded. Property was sacred in the territories. Without law, without order, civilization crumbled. The young one. Blackwood paused, letting the crowd lean in. She was found in a compromising position with a married man. Adultery, fornication, the kind of moral decay that rots a community from the inside out. More nods, more murmurs of agreement. Women like that had to be dealt with, or decent folk would suffer. And this one. His finger swung toward Eva, and something ugly flickered in his eyes. Something possessive and cruel and deeply satisfied. This one is Evangeline Ashford, accused of murdering her own husband in cold blood 9 months ago. Beat him to death with a fireplace poker while he slept. The crowd erupted, gasps and whispers and voices raised in righteous fury. Eva watched Blackwood, and he watched her back. They both knew the truth. They both knew exactly what had happened that night last March. The way Edmund Ashford had come home drunk, angrier than usual. The way his hands had locked around Eva's throat, squeezing until black spots danced in her vision. The gunshot that had echoed through the house. The way Edmund had fallen with a hole in the back of his head, his blood spreading across the bedroom floor in a dark pool. They both knew who had pulled the trigger, and it hadn't been Eva. Now here's the thing. Blackwood raised his hands to quiet the crowd, the gesture of a benevolent leader calling for calm. We could hang them. That would be simple enough. Quick drop, broken neck, problem solved. 3 fewer criminals in the world. He paused, letting the words sink in, letting the crowd imagine it. The platform, the nooses, the bodies swinging in the wind. But I got to thinking, what a waste that would be. What a terrible waste of potential. The way he said that last word made Eva's skin crawl beneath her torn dress. So here's what I propose, and I think you'll agree it's more than fair. Any man here who wants a wife, any man willing to take responsibility for one of these women, can have her. Right here, right now. No questions asked. No courtship required. No need to win her father's approval or prove yourself worthy. The crowd stirred. Some laughed, thinking it was a joke. Some looked shocked, scandalized by the suggestion. But others leaned forward with sudden interest, eyes moving over the three women like buyers at a livestock auction. You take her off our hands, she becomes your problem. Your responsibility. Blackwood continued, warming to his theme. You keep her in line. Make sure she doesn't cause any more trouble. And in return, well, you get yourself a wife without all the usual fuss and bother. His grin widened. Seems like a fair trade to me. Eva felt bile rise in her throat. This was it. This was Blackwood's final punishment, his ultimate victory, offering her up like livestock to whoever wanted her, knowing that no decent man would touch a woman accused of murder, knowing she would stand there alone and unwanted while the other women were claimed, until she had no choice but to beg him to save her, to finally give him what he'd been demanding for 9 months. She would rather die first, would rather feel the rope around her neck, the platform drop away beneath her feet. At least in death, she'd be free of him. You can't be serious. The voice cut through the murmurs, quiet but firm. The crowd turned to look. Blackwood's eyes found the speaker, and his smile took on a sharp edge. Silas Whitmore. The sheriff's voice dripped with false warmth. Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you preferred the company of sheep to people these days. The man who had spoken stepped forward through the crowd. Silas Whitmore was not a large man, but there was something solid about him, something weathered and steady, like an old oak tree that had survived too many storms to be knocked down by one more. He was 38 years old, but looked older, with lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. Lines that spoke of hard work and harder grief, of sleepless nights and responsibilities shouldered alone. His hair was the color of dark honey, touched with gray at the temples. His hands were calloused and scarred from years of ranch work. He wore simple clothes, a wool coat over a flannel shirt, boots caked with mud and sheep dung. Nothing fancy, nothing that marked him as anyone special. He was nobody important. Just a quiet rancher who kept to himself, raised his sheep and his daughters, and minded his own business. But when he looked at those 3 women tied to posts in the center of Silver Creek's town square, something in his chest went tight and hot and wrong. This is wrong. The words came out steady, despite the anger simmering beneath them. Blackwood raised an eyebrow, the picture of polite curiosity. Wrong? How so? You can't auction off human beings like their property, like their livestock at a market. I'm not auctioning them, Silas. Blackwood's voice was smooth as oil, reasonable as a Sunday sermon. I'm offering them a chance at redemption, a chance to be useful members of society instead of criminals rotting in a cell or swinging from a rope. Seems mighty merciful to me. Merciful. Silas tasted the word, found it bitter on his tongue. Practical, Blackwood amended with a shrug. Now, if you've got a problem with how I run things in this town, you're more than welcome to take it up with the territorial governor. Until then, I'm the law here, and this is how we're handling it. Silas opened his mouth to argue, but a small voice stopped him cold. Papa. He turned to find his daughters standing right behind him, having climbed down from the wagon, despite his explicit orders to stay put and wait. Rosalind and Violet Whitmore were 6 years old, identical in every way that mattered. Golden hair that caught what little winter sun managed to break through the clouds. Blue eyes, wide and serious, and far too old for children their age. Small bodies pressed together for warmth, for comfort, for the kind of certainty that only twins possess. Girls. Silas's voice gentled automatically, the way it always did when he spoke to them. I told you to stay in the wagon. This isn't a place for children. "Papa, look!" Violet's small hand gripped his coat with surprising strength, her voice trembling but certain. "Look at her." Silas followed his daughter's gaze to the third woman, to Evangeline Ashford, with her bruised face and burning eyes and defiant posture. "We have to go home." He reached for their hands, trying to guide them away from this ugliness. "This isn't something you should see." But Rose grabbed his other sleeve, her grip just as strong as her sister's. "Papa, wait!" Her voice carried that quality he'd learned to recognize over the past 3 years. That mix of urgency and fear and absolute certainty. "Please wait." "What is it, sweetheart?" The twins looked at each other. One of those silent conversations that twins seemed to have without words, born from sharing a womb and a crib, and every moment of their lives since. Then Violet turned back to him, her blue eyes impossibly wide and serious. "Papa." She whispered it like a prayer, like a secret too important to say out loud. "That's her." Silas frowned, crouching down to their level. "That's who, sweetheart?" "The Snow Lady," Rose breathed, tears already forming in her eyes. "The lady from the snow." Something cold and sharp slithered down Silas's spine. His heart stuttered in his chest. The Snow Lady. The girls had mentioned her before, in nightmares that woke them screaming, in fevered sleep when illness made them delirious, in moments when they seemed to drift somewhere far away, back to a night that should have killed them. It had been early in 1875, nearly 2 years ago now. Silas had been away at a livestock auction 3 counties over, a journey that should have taken 3 days. His wife Lillian had decided to take the girls into town for supplies, planning to be back before dark. But a blizzard had blown in without warning, one of those deadly storms that could bury a man in minutes, that turned the familiar landscape into a white hell where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Lillian had tried to get them home. The wagon had overturned on the icy road. When the search party found them the next morning, Lillian was dead, frozen solid, her body curled around the girls in a final desperate attempt to shelter them from the cold. But the girls were alive, barely conscious, severely hypothermic, delirious with cold and grief and trauma, but alive, and wrapped in a thick wool blanket that didn't belong to them, a blanket no one in the search party recognized, a blanket that had somehow kept them warm enough to survive when by all rights they should have frozen to death beside their mother. For weeks afterward, the girls had talked about a woman in the snow, a dark-haired lady who had found them, wrapped them up, sang to them until they stopped being scared. The doctor had said it was a hallucination, the mind's desperate attempt to make sense of trauma. Children that young, that cold, their brains inventing a guardian angel because the truth was too terrible to bear. Silas had believed him. He'd had to believe him because the alternative was too painful. That someone had been there. Someone had saved his daughters, and he would never know who to thank. Girls. He said it slowly, carefully, his heart hammering against his ribs. What are you saying? That's her, Papa, Violet insisted, pointing at Ava with a trembling finger. That's the lady who saved us. That's the lady from the snow, Rose added, tears streaming down her face now. We know it's her. Silas looked up at the woman tied to the post. She hadn't noticed them yet, was still staring straight ahead with that defiant fury. But now that he looked closer, really looked, he could see what his daughters were seeing. The dark hair the girls had described, the strong features, the way she stood with her shoulders back despite everything, despite the cold and the hunger and the certain knowledge that death was coming. Are you sure? He whispered, though some part of him already knew the answer. Both girls nodded in unison, their faces streaked with tears. "She sang to us, Papa," Rose said, her voice breaking. "She sang the song about the stars and the river, and she kept us warm when we were so cold we couldn't feel our fingers. And she told us to hold on, that help was coming, that we just had to hold on a little longer." "And then she was gone," Violet finished, her small body shaking. "We woke up and she was gone, and no one believed us. They said we dreamed her, but we didn't, Papa. We didn't." Silas's mind raced, trying to make sense of this impossible claim. If this was true, if this woman really had saved his daughters, then she had given up her own blanket, her own warmth, her own chance at survival to keep two strangers' children alive. She had nearly died doing it, based on what the girls remembered. And now she was tied to a post in the town square, accused of murder, being offered up like merchandise to whoever wanted her. "Any takers?" Blackwood's voice rang out across the square, breaking through Silas's thoughts. "Come on, gentlemen, don't be shy. These women need husbands, and Lord knows some of you could use wives. Who wants to make a claim?" A few men stepped forward toward the crying young woman. Someone else approached the elderly woman, muttering about needing help with his farm and someone to cook his meals. But no one went near Eva Ashford. No one wanted the accused murderer. No one wanted to take responsibility for a woman who might kill them in their sleep. "What about you, Silas?" Blackwood called out, spotting him in the crowd. "You've been alone for 3 years now. Those girls of yours could use a mother, a woman's touch around the house." He paused, eyes glinting with something ugly and amused. "What do you say? Pick any woman you want. I'm feeling generous today." The words dripped with mockery. The implication was clear, brutally clear, that Silas was desperate enough, pathetic enough, lonely enough to take damaged goods off the sheriff's hands, that he should be grateful for the opportunity. Silas looked down at his daughters. They were clutching his coat, looking up at him with those huge blue eyes that had seen far too much for 6 years old. Eyes that had watched their mother die. Eyes that remembered things they shouldn't be able to remember. Violet's lip trembled. Rose's small voice broke the silence, clear as a bell. "Please, Papa, we can't let them hurt her. She saved us. We have to save her back." And just like that, Silas knew what he had to do. The certainty settled into his bones like stones, heavy, immovable. Right. He stood up slowly, his decision made. He walked through the crowd, which parted before him like water around a stone. Everyone watching, everyone waiting to see what the quiet sheep rancher would do, what fool thing he'd say, or how quickly he'd back down. When he reached the platform, he looked directly at Cornelius Blackwood, met those cold, steel eyes without flinching. "I'll take her." Blackwood's eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. "Which one?" Silas turned and pointed at Eva Ashford. "Her." The crowd exploded. Gasps and shouts and someone laughing in disbelief, the sound high and mocking. Silas ignored all of it. His eyes locked on the woman at the post, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Evangeline Ashford moved. Her head turned slowly, her dark eyes finding his across the distance. He saw surprise flash across her battered face, quick as lightning, then suspicion, then something that might have been fear, not of him, of hope itself. "You sure about that, Silas?" Blackwood asked, his voice lilting with barely concealed amusement. "She's accused of killing her husband. Beat him to death with a fireplace poker, they say. Murdered him in cold blood. You want that kind of woman around those precious daughters of yours? I'm sure. Blackwood studied him for a long moment, as if trying to figure out the angle, the hidden motive. Then he shrugged, clearly deciding that Silas's foolishness was his own problem. Your funeral, he said lightly, or maybe hers. Either way, she's your problem now. Your responsibility. He turned to one of his deputies, a young man who looked uncomfortable with the whole proceeding. Cut her loose. The deputy approached Ava with a knife, sawing through the ropes at her wrists. She didn't move as they fell away, just stood there rubbing the raw, bloody marks they'd left behind. Her eyes never left Silas's face, searching for something. Understanding, maybe. Or the trap she was certain must be hidden somewhere in this impossible turn of events. Silas pulled off his coat, ignoring the cold that immediately bit through his shirt. He walked toward her while the crowd watched in silence. When he reached her, he held out the coat. Here. His voice was quiet, meant only for her. You're shaking. Ava stared at the coat like it might bite her, like it was some kind of trick or test. Why? She whispered, her voice raw and broken from 3 days of cold and dehydration. Why would you do this? My daughters. Silas glanced back at where Rose and Violet stood, watching with tear-streaked faces and clasped hands. They say you saved them once, 2 years ago, in a blizzard. They say you kept them alive when they should have died. Something flickered in Ava's eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or memory trying to surface through fog and trauma. Her gaze shifted to the twins, and Silas saw her face crack just slightly. Saw something like pain or grief or desperate hope cross her features before she locked it away again, rebuilt the walls. I don't remember. Her voice was uncertain now, the defiance wavering. I don't remember saving anyone. They remember you. Silas stepped closer, draping the coat over her shoulders before she could protest. That's enough for me. For a moment they just stood there, close enough that he could see the full extent of the damage someone had done to her face. Close enough to see the way her hands trembled, even as she tried to hold herself still. Close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes, soul deep and devastating. Up close, she looked like someone who had been fighting for so long she'd forgotten what peace felt like someone who expected the next blow to come from any direction at any moment. Come on, Silas said it gently, the way he'd talk to a wounded animal. Let's go home. He turned and started walking back through the crowd, trusting that she would follow, hoping she would follow, praying she wouldn't bolt or collapse or simply give up. Behind him he heard Blackwood's laughter, heard the whispers and jeers from the townspeople, heard someone spit on the ground and mutter, "Murderer," under their breath. But he didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't give them the satisfaction. And then he felt it, a hand slipping into his. Not one of his daughter's small hands, Eva's hand, thin and cold and shaking, gripping his like she was drowning, and he was the only solid thing in a churning sea. Silas closed his fingers around hers and kept walking. When they reached the wagon, Rose and Violet scrambled into the back without being told, making room on the bench. Silas helped Ava up onto the seat beside him, acutely aware of how carefully she moved, how she winced when she bent her body at certain angles. Someone had hurt her badly, recently. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to get the horses moving. As they pulled away from the square, away from the crowd and the judgment and Cornelius Blackwood's mocking smile, Silas felt Ava's hand slip out of his. For a moment he thought she was pulling away, putting distance between them, now that they were out of sight. But then he felt a weight against his shoulder and realized she'd simply collapsed, her body folding sideways until her head rested against him, either unconscious or so far beyond exhausted that it made no difference. Behind him, the twins' voices came soft and wondering. "Is she okay, Papa?" Rose whispered. "She will be." Silas said it, though he had no idea if it was true. "She will be." The ride back to the ranch took over an hour, the wagon creaking along the frozen road as the winter sun sank lower in the sky. The temperature dropped with each passing mile, the cold settling in like it meant to stay. Eva didn't wake. She stayed slumped against Silas's shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady, occasionally making small sounds in her sleep that might have been words or might have been pain. Silas kept one arm around her to keep her from sliding off the seat, feeling the warmth of her body through the coat despite the cold. The twins were uncharacteristically quiet in the back of the wagon, just watching Eva with those serious, ancient eyes. Silas could feel their gazes on him, too, questions forming that they were too young to know how to ask. "What now, Papa? What happens when we get home? What if she really is dangerous?" He didn't have answers, didn't know what he was doing, beyond following his gut and trusting his daughter's conviction. When they finally reached the ranch, the sun was painting the sky in its final colors, orange and gold and deep purple. Silas's house sat solid against the darkening horizon, a two-story structure he'd built himself years ago with his own hands and his father's help. Weathered but sturdy, surrounded by corrals and pastures where his sheep grazed in the gathering dusk. It wasn't much, but it was home. It was safe. He pulled the wagon to a stop and carefully shifted Eva's weight, lifting her down as gently as he could. She stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open in confusion. "Where?" she started, her voice thick with sleep and disorientation. "It's okay." Silas kept his voice low and steady. "We're home. You're safe here." She looked around at the ranch, at the house, at the twins who were already running ahead to open the front door. Something unreadable crossed her face. Disbelief, maybe. Or fear that this was all some elaborate trick, some new form of torture Blackwood had devised. "I don't understand." Her words came out barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't know what they say I did, what I might have done." "No, I don't." Silas met her eyes, those dark eyes that held so much pain and fury. "But I know what my daughters say you did, and I know what I just watched that sheriff do to you. That's enough for now." He carried her toward the house, and this time she didn't protest. She just wrapped her arms around his neck and held on, her face pressed against his shoulder, her body trembling with something that might have been relief, or fear, or simply the last of her strength giving out. Inside, the house smelled like dust and old coffee, and the faint scent of dried sage from bundles his wife used to hang in every room. Bundles he still couldn't quite bring himself to remove, even 3 years after Lillian's death. Silas carried Ava upstairs to the guest room, the one that had been empty since Lillian died, the one he couldn't quite decide what to do with, so he'd left it untouched, frozen in time like a room in a museum. He laid her down on the bed, and immediately Rose and Violet were there, climbing up beside her, despite the dirt on their dresses and the cold still clinging to their skin. Their small hands patted Ava's arms and face like they were making sure she was real, that she wouldn't disappear like smoke. "It's okay now," Violet said with the absolute certainty only children possess. "Papa won't let anyone hurt you." "We won't let anyone hurt you," Rose echoed, her small face fierce. "You saved us. Now we save you." Ava's eyes filled with tears, the first real emotion Silas had seen from her beyond rage and suspicion. She reached out with shaking hands and pulled the girls close, burying her face in their golden hair. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, her whole body trembling. Silas backed out of the room quietly, giving them space, giving her privacy for this moment of breaking open. He stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to his daughter's soft voices murmuring comfort, listening to Eva cry, really cry, for what might have been the first time in months. Great, gasping sobs that sounded like they were being torn from somewhere deep and wounded. What have I done? The thought came unbidden. What in God's name have I just done? He'd brought an accused murderer into his home, a woman he didn't know, whose story he hadn't heard, whose guilt or innocence was a complete mystery, a woman who could be exactly what the town said she was, dangerous, violent, capable of killing. He'd done it because his 6-year-old daughters had pointed at her and said, "That's her." Because something in his gut had screamed that what Blackwood was doing was wrong, was cruel, was an abuse of power that couldn't go unchallenged. Because when he'd looked into Evangeline Ashford's furious, exhausted eyes, he'd seemed someone who had been fighting a losing battle for far too long. Someone who deserved a chance, even if she didn't believe it herself. Silas walked downstairs and sank into the chair by the cold fireplace, suddenly exhausted. His head fell into his hands. Outside, the sun finished setting, and darkness crept across the ranch like a blanket being pulled over the world. In the guest room upstairs, a woman who'd been condemned without trial slept fitfully between 2 little girls who believed she'd saved their lives. And in the parlor, a man who'd lost his wife 3 years ago wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or the most important decision. Either way, there was no going back now. The last thing Silas heard before exhaustion finally pulled him under was the sound of soft singing from upstairs. An old melody he didn't recognize, the words indistinct, but the tune haunting. Something about stars and rivers and finding your way home. His daughters' voices joined in, their high, sweet notes twining around Ava's deeper tones like vines around a trellis. And despite everything, despite the accusations and the bruises and the sheriff's mocking laughter, despite the uncertainty and the fear and the very real possibility that he'd just brought danger into his home, Silas smiled, because for the first time in 3 years, his house didn't sound empty anymore. Morning came too early, slicing through the curtains in thin bands of pale gold. Silas woke with a crick in his neck from sleeping in the chair, disoriented for a moment about why he wasn't in his own bed. Then memory crashed back like cold water. The town square, the ropes, Ava's bruised face, his daughter's desperate whispers. "That's her, Papa. That's the lady from the snow." He sat up quickly, his heart already pounding, listened to the house. Silence. Too much silence. What if she'd run during the night? What if she'd hurt the girls? What if this whole thing had been a terrible, catastrophic mistake? Silas moved quickly toward the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, reached the guest room and stopped in the doorway. All 3 of them were still there, tangled together in sleep, like puppies in a litter. Rose had her arm thrown across Ava's waist. Violet's golden head rested on Ava's shoulder, and Ava herself lay on her back, one hand curved protectively around each girl, her face finally relaxed, in true rest. The morning light caught the bruises on her jaw and temple, turning them vivid shades of purple and green and sickly yellow. But her expression was peaceful in a way that made Silas's chest ache with something he couldn't quite name. He backed away carefully, not wanting to wake them, and headed downstairs to start coffee. His hands shook slightly as he worked the grinder, the familiar task grounding him. What was he supposed to do now? He'd acted on instinct yesterday, on faith in his daughters, and a gut feeling that Blackwood was corrupt and cruel. But in the harsh light of morning, reality pressed in. He'd brought a stranger into his home, an accused murderer. He knew nothing about her except that the town had condemned her, and his children believed she'd saved them. The coffee was just beginning to boil when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Light footsteps that paused halfway down, as if the person making them was considering retreat. "Coffee's almost ready," Silas called out, keeping his voice gentle. The footsteps resumed, slower now. Eva appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his coat over her torn dress. Her dark hair was loose and wild around her shoulders. In the full daylight streaming through the windows, the damage was worse than he'd realized. Not just the bruises on her face, but the way she held herself, favoring her left side, the raw rope burns circling her wrists, the careful way she moved, like someone who'd learned that sudden movements brought pain. "The girls are still asleep," she said quietly. Her voice was rough, like she'd spent years screaming and had only recently learned to whisper again. "Good." Silas poured 2 cups of coffee, sliding one across the table toward her. "They need the rest. You should sit. You look like you're about to fall over." Eva hesitated, then lowered herself carefully into the chair. Each movement deliberate and pained. She wrapped both hands around the cup but didn't drink. Just stared into the dark liquid, like it might hold answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. "I should go." The words came out flat, empty. It was kind of you, what you did yesterday. Kinder than I deserved. But I can't stay here. It's not safe. Not for you, not for them." "Safe from what?" Silas sat down across from her, cradling his own cup. She looked up at him, and he saw the exhaustion behind her eyes. Not just physical weariness, but the bone-deep tiredness of someone who'd been running for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to stop. "From me, from what people think I am, from what I might actually be." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. "Did you kill your husband?" Eva's jaw tightened. Her hands clenched around the coffee cup. For a moment, Silas thought she wouldn't answer, would shut down completely or bolt for the door. Then she laughed, a short, bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with pain. "Does it matter? The town's already decided I did. Blackwood's already decided. Even if I stood in that square and swore on every Bible in the territory, they wouldn't believe me. They've already made up their minds about who I am and what I'm capable of. I'm not asking what the town believes." Silas kept his voice level, calm. "I'm asking what's true." Eva stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Judgment, probably. Or the inevitable moment when he'd realize his mistake and throw her out, send her back to Blackwood and the noose. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My husband's name was Edmund Ashford. We'd been married 8 years. He was—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "He was a good man when I met him. Funny, gentle, full of big dreams about the life we'd build together out here in the territories. The farm we'd have, the children, the future." She paused, her fingers tightening around the cup until her knuckles went white. But after we married, after we moved out here and the reality set in, the hard work, the isolation, the way dreams don't always match up with what life actually gives you, something changed. Or maybe it didn't change. Maybe I just finally saw what had always been there underneath the charm. Silas stayed silent, letting her tell it at her own pace. Not pushing, just listening. He drank. Ava's voice was steadier now, as if telling the story was somehow easier than holding it inside. Not at first. At first it was just on special occasions, celebrations, but more and more as the years went on. And when he drank, he got mean. Her hand moved unconsciously to her ribs, pressing against what Silas now realized must be injuries hidden beneath her dress and his coat. It started with words, telling me I was fat, ugly, worthless, that no other man would ever want me, so I'd better be grateful he put up with me, that I should count my blessings every day that someone was willing to tolerate a woman who looked like me. She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth, as if physically holding back the memories. Then it wasn't just words anymore. It was his fists, his boots, whatever was close to hand when the anger took him. The words fell into the quiet kitchen like stones into still water. Silas felt his hands curl into fists under the table, hidden from view. He'd seen it before, during his time in the territorial militia. Men who took their anger and their fear and their shame out on the people who couldn't fight back, who used their wives as punching bags and called it discipline. 9 months ago. Eva's voice was steadier now, as if she'd found her footing in the telling. Edmund came home drunk, drunker than usual. He was angry about something, money maybe, or the way I'd looked at another man in town. I don't even remember what set him off. After a while, the reasons stopped mattering. She stopped, pressing one hand to her bruised ribs as if the memory itself caused physical pain. He came at me with his fists, and I ran. I ran upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom, but he broke down the door, splintered it like kindling. I grabbed the fireplace poker because it was the only weapon I had, the only thing within reach. Her voice cracked, and I held it up. Told him to stop. Told him I'd use it if I had to, that I wasn't going to let him hurt me anymore, that I was done being afraid. She looked up at Silas, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and he just laughed. He laughed and said, "Go ahead, try it. You're too fat and slow to hurt anyone. You're pathetic." And he kept coming. Eva pressed both hands to her face now, her shoulders shaking. I swung, but my hands were shaking and I missed. The poker flew out of my grip and hit the wall. And then he was on me, his hands around my throat, squeezing, telling me he was going to kill me, that I was worthless, that no one would miss me, that he should have done this years ago. Silas felt ice slide down his spine. I remember his hands around my throat. Eva's voice dropped so low he had to lean forward to hear it. Remember not being able to breathe. The room going dark at the edges, thinking, this is it. This is how I die. She took a shaky breath. And then there was a gunshot. Just one, loud enough to make my ears ring. Edmund's hands went slack, and he fell on top of me. Dead weight. And there was blood. So much blood, everywhere. She looked up, met Silas's eyes directly. I pushed him off me and saw the hold in the back of his head. And when I looked up, Sheriff Cornelius Blackwood was standing in the doorway with a gun in his hand. Everything in Silas went still. Blackwood shot him. He saved my life. But there was something strange in Eva's voice now, something that didn't match the words. "That's what he told me. He said he'd heard the commotion from outside, had come to investigate, said he saw Edmund attacking me through the window, and shot him to save me. Said I should be grateful." "But you're not," Silas said slowly, understanding dawning. Eva's laugh was hollow, brittle. "I was at first. God help me. I was so grateful. I thanked him, cried on his shoulder. And then he said," her voice dropped even lower, "he said I owed him now. May's saving my life made us connected. Said Edmund was a drunk and a fool who didn't appreciate what he had. But Blackwood would. Blackwood would take care of me, protect me, if I'd just be grateful. If I'd show him how grateful I was." The implication hung in the air like poison. I told him no. Ava's voice hardened, that steel returning. I told him I was grateful for saving my life, but I wasn't interested in that kind of arrangement. I wasn't interested in being his kept woman, his secret, his reward for doing what any decent person would have done. She met Silas's eyes, defiant now, and he smiled at me, this cold smile that made my skin crawl. And he said, "That's unfortunate." Just like that. "That's unfortunate, Mrs. Ashford. I hope you don't come to regret that decision." Ava's hands trembled around the coffee cup. 2 days later he came back with deputies. Said there were witnesses who saw me fighting with Edmund earlier that day. May's the angle of the bullet was all wrong for someone shooting from the doorway. Said maybe I'd shot Edmund myself and was trying to blame it on a lawman to cover my tracks. Rage built in Silas's chest, hot and fierce. He arrested me, put me in a cell, and let the whole town believe I was a murderer. Ava's voice shook now with fury. And every time he came to bring me food or water, which got less and less frequent as the months went on, he'd ask if I'd changed my mind about being grateful. Every single time. Jesus Christ, Silas breathed. I refused every time. There was steel in her voice now, that same defiant fire he'd seen in the town square. Even when he started hitting me, even when he stopped bringing food for days at a time, even when he told me I'd hang if I didn't cooperate, I'd rather die than let that man touch me. "So he found another way to punish you," Silas said, understanding fully now. "The post, the crowd, offering you up like livestock. He thought some desperate man would take you, and then at least you wouldn't hang. But he made sure everyone knew what you were accused of. Made sure no decent man would want you." Ava nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "He thought I'd watch them take the other women and leave me there alone. Thought I'd beg him to save me rather than face the noose. Thought I'd finally break. But then my daughters pointed at you," Silas said softly. Ava's expression cracked, something vulnerable showing through all that steel. "I don't understand why. I don't remember saving anyone. I mean—" She pressed her hand to her forehead. "I remember a storm. 2 winters ago. I remember being out in it, trying to get to the next town before the blizzard hit. Remember finding something in the snow. But everything after that is blank. I woke up 3 days later in a neighbor's barn, with a concussion and frostbite so bad I lost 2 toes. They said I'd been found unconscious on the road, half frozen." She looked at Silas, confusion and wonder mixing on her battered face. "If I did save your daughters, I don't remember it. I lost part of that winter to fever and confusion." "They remember you." Silas stood and moved to the cupboard, pulling out a folded piece of fabric he'd kept there for 2 years, unable to throw it away, but unsure what to do with it. He unfolded the blanket slowly. Dark green wool, worn thin in places, but still intact, well made, loved. They remember the song you sang, something about stars and a river. Eva's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. Her face went pale. "My mother's song," she whispered. "She used to sing it to me when I was little, before she died. I don't even remember all the words anymore, not consciously. But sometimes when I'm scared or cold or alone, I find myself humming it without thinking." Silas held up the blanket. Margaret, my wife, was already gone when the search party found the girls. But they had this wrapped around them. A blanket no one recognized. A blanket that didn't belong to us. He turned the corner toward her. Embroidered in faded thread, almost worn away but still visible. E.A. Evangeline Ashford. Eva stared at the blanket, her eyes going wide. She reached out with shaking hands, touching the fabric like it might disappear. "I had a blanket that winter." Her voice was barely audible. "Wool, dark green. My grandmother made it for me when I was a girl. I loved that blanket. It was the only thing I had left of her after she died." She took the blanket in her hands, held it to her face, breathed in deep. "It still smells like home," she whispered, "like my grandmother's house, like lavender and wood smoke and safety." A sound from the doorway made them both turn. Rose and Violet stood there in their nightgowns, watching with solemn eyes. "That's your blanket, Mama Eva," Violet said with absolute certainty. "The one you gave us in the snow." Rose walked forward and touched Ava's hand where it clutched the green wool. "We kept it safe for you. We knew you'd come back someday." Ava made a broken sound, half sob, half laugh, and pulled both girls into her arms, the blanket wrapped around all three of them. Silas turned away, giving them privacy. But not before he saw the tears streaming down Ava's face. Not tears of grief this time. Tears of something that looked dangerously, impossibly, like hope. The peace couldn't last forever. Silas had known that from the moment he'd walked Ava Ashford through his front door. But he hadn't expected it to feel so much like hope before it shattered. The first 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal, almost like healing. Ava moved through the house like a ghost at first, silent and careful, as if afraid that breathing too loudly might shatter whatever fragile grace had brought her here. She slept in the guest room, but spent most of each night sitting in the chair by the window, watching the darkness beyond the glass, waiting for torches and ropes and men with guns to come riding up the path. But no one came. The ranch was too far from town for casual visitors, too isolated for the kind of drop-in socializing that marked closer communities. And slowly, carefully, Ava began to breathe again. She started doing small things around the house, washing dishes after meals, sweeping floors that hadn't been properly swept since Lillian died, mending the girls' clothes that had been waiting in a basket for months, maybe years, for hands that knew how to work a needle. "You don't have to do that," Silas told her one afternoon, finding her bent over a pair of Violet's boots, stitching up a split seam with movements so precise and small they looked like machine work. "I need to do something." Ava didn't look up, her hands moving steadily. "If I just sit, I think too much. If I think too much, I remember." So Silas let her work. He watched her repair clothes with stitches so even and tight they'd last for years. Watched her brush the girls' hair each morning with infinite patience, working through tangles that made them wince, humming that melody they claimed to remember from the snow. Watched her teach them things, how to knead bread properly, how to identify edible plants from poisonous ones, how to move quietly through the world without drawing unwanted attention. "Where did you learn all this?" Silas asked one evening, watching her show the twins how to braid leather into a bracelet, her scarred hands moving with practiced ease. Eva's fingers paused. "My father. He was a blacksmith. Taught me everything about working with my hands, how to see what needed fixing and how to fix it. And my brother—" Her voice caught. "My brother August taught me to read, to think, to stand up for myself. He always said knowledge was the only thing nobody could take from you, not even with a gun or a badge or a rope around your neck. Where is he now, your brother?" Something flickered across Eva's face. Pain and longing and shame, all mixed together. "I don't know. We had a fight before I married Edmund. August didn't like him. Said he saw something wrong underneath all the charm. I didn't listen. Told August if he couldn't be happy for me, I didn't want him around." She stared at her hands, at the leather braid taking shape between her fingers. "He left. I haven't seen him in 8 years. Haven't heard from him. For all I know, he's dead. Or maybe he just decided I wasn't worth the trouble anymore." "You ever try to find him?" Eva's laugh was bitter. "How? I've been either trapped in a marriage or trapped in a cell. Wasn't exactly free to go searching. Besides, after what happened with Edmund, after the accusations, maybe it's better August doesn't know where I am. Better he's not connected to this mess." She looked at Silas, her expression hardening. Better he doesn't know his sister's an accused murderer who might hang anyway, just slower than Blackwood planned. The girls followed Ava everywhere, peppering her with questions, demanding stories and songs and lessons. And Ava began to soften under their attention, like ice under spring sun. The hardness in her eyes eased slightly. She smiled occasionally, small, uncertain smiles that looked out of practice, but genuine. She started eating more, her plate no longer pushed away half full. She slept better, the dark circles under her eyes gradually fading. But Silas noticed other things too. The way Eva sometimes froze when he moved too quickly near her, her whole body going rigid like prey spotted by a predator. The way she flinched at loud noises, a door slamming, a pot dropped in the kitchen, one of the sheep bleating unexpectedly. The way she still checked the windows before bed, testing the locks, positioning herself so she could see both the door and the window from where she slept. The way she still kept a knife under her pillow. He didn't mention any of it. Just made sure to move slowly around her, to speak softly, to give her space when she needed it, and quiet company when she didn't. One night he found her in the barn, sitting on a hay bale and watching his prize ram through the stall bars. The animal was massive and ill-tempered, a creature most ranchers would have sold off or slaughtered long ago. It had broken 3 fence rails last month, trying to fight its own reflection in a water trough. "That one's trouble," Silas said, settling onto the hay bale beside her. "Mean as a snake, tries to gore anyone who gets close." "He's not mean." Eva's voice was quiet, certain. "He's scared. Look at his eyes. Someone hurt him before you got him. He's not attacking. He's just waiting for the next blow to fall." Silas studied the ram. She was right. Now that she'd said it, he could see it. The way the animal's eyes tracked every movement. The way its muscles tensed at the slightest sound, ready to fight or flee. "How do you know that?" Ava was silent for a long moment, her gaze never leaving the ram. "Because I know what it looks like," she finally said, waiting for the next blow, expecting pain every time someone gets close, fighting because you don't know any other way to survive. She turned to look at him, and in the dim light of the barn, her eyes were luminous with something he couldn't name. "You never hit me." Her voice was soft, wondering. "You never even raise your voice. Every time I flinch, you step back. Every time I freeze, you wait. You give me space to breathe." She paused. "Why?" "Because you deserve better than what you've had." Silas said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Because my daughters love you. Because—" He stopped, unsure how to finish. "Because what?" "Because the first time I saw you tied to that post, with half the town screaming for your blood, you didn't cry. You didn't beg. You just stood there with your head up and fire in your eyes. And I thought—" He shook his head. "I thought there's someone worth fighting for. Someone who hasn't given up even when everyone else has given up on her." Ava's breath caught. Her hand moved without seeming to, reaching out to touch his where it rested on his knee. "You don't know me," she whispered. "You don't know what I'm like when I'm not terrified and broken and grateful for every scrap of kindness. What if the real me isn't worth fighting for? What if I'm just—" "Then I'll find out," Silas interrupted gently, "and we'll figure it out together. But I don't believe that's true, Ava. I don't believe for 1 second that the woman who gave up her only blanket to save 2 strangers' children is anything other than exactly who I think she is." Ava stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for the lie, for the angle, for the inevitable disappointment. When she didn't find it, she did something that surprised them both. She took his hand. Her fingers were rough from work, scarred from survival, but they fit perfectly in his, warm despite the cold barn air. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of sheep settling in their pens. "I don't know how to trust someone. I don't know how to stop waiting for everything good to be ripped away." "Then we'll learn together." Silas squeezed her hand gently. "One day at a time." They sat like that for a while, hands linked in the darkness, listening to the sheep and the wind and the quiet sounds of the ranch at night. And somewhere in that moment, something shifted between them. Not dramatically, not like lightning striking or the ground opening up. Just the tiniest crack in the wall Eva had built around herself. The smallest opening for hope to slip through. The peace shattered on the 4th day. It was a Tuesday morning, crisp and clear. Silas was in the barn checking on the ram, which had indeed calmed down significantly since Eva had started spending time with it, proving her theory right, when Violet came running. Her small face was white with panic, her golden hair flying behind her. "Papa!" The word came out breathless, terrified. "Papa, come quick! There's men coming!" Silas dropped everything and ran. He found Eva standing on the porch, her body rigid as iron, her hands gripping the railing so hard her knuckles had gone white. Rose stood pressed against her side, and Violet scrambled up the steps to join them, wrapping both arms around Eva's waist. 4 riders were approaching from the main road, their horses kicking up dust in the cold morning air. Even from this distance, Silas recognized the lead horse. A pale gray gelding that belonged to only one man in Silver Creek. Sheriff Cornelius Blackwood. "Girls?" Silas's voice was calm but firm, the tone that meant no arguments. "Go inside." "No." Eva's voice was steady, but he could see her trembling. "I won't hide. I won't let him think I'm afraid." "Eva, you don't have to. He wants me scared." She looked at Silas, and beneath the fear in her eyes, that familiar fire still burned. He wants me cowering behind you, like some helpless thing he broke. I won't give him that satisfaction. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin. Whatever happens, I face it standing up. Silas wanted to argue, wanted to shield her from whatever was coming. But there wasn't time. The riders were already pulling into the yard, their horses' breath steaming in the cold air. Blackwood dismounted first, his movements slow and deliberate, like a man who knew he held all the power and wanted everyone else to feel it too. His 3 deputies fanned out behind him, hands resting on their gun belts.
Young men, none of them older than 25. They looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting between Blackwood and Ava and Silas like they weren't quite sure what they were supposed to be doing here. "Morning, Silas." Blackwood's voice was pleasant, conversational, as if he were just a neighbor dropping by for coffee. "Mrs. Ashford, beautiful day, isn't it?" "What do you want, Blackwood?" "Just a friendly visit." The sheriff's eyes slid past Silas to Ava, and something ugly flickered in their steel-gray depths. "Checking on the welfare of your house guest, making sure she's behaving herself, making sure she hasn't caused any trouble for you and those sweet daughters of yours." "She hasn't." "Glad to hear it." Blackwood took a step closer, his smile widening. "But here's the thing, Silas. I've been getting complaints from concerned citizens. Folks in town are nervous about the arrangement you've made here. They don't like knowing there's an accused murderer living so close by, where she could hurt innocent people, where she could corrupt those little girls with her lies and her violence." His gaze moved back to Eva, hungry and possessive. "They're worried about their safety, their children's safety. And as sheriff, it's my duty to address those concerns." "The only person anyone should be worried about," Eva said from the porch, her voice cutting through the cold air like a blade, "is you." Blackwood's smile flickered. "Careful now, Mrs. Ashford. That's no way to talk to an officer of the law. I'm trying to help you, trying to keep you safe from people who might want to take justice into their own hands. You're not the law." Eva descended the porch steps slowly, each movement controlled. "You're a man with a badge who uses it to hurt people. You killed my husband, Cornelius. You framed me for murder. And you thought you could break me into being your—" "That's enough." Blackwood's voice went cold, all pretense of friendliness dropping away like a mask. His hand moved toward his gun, just slightly, just enough to be a threat. Silas stepped between them, his own hand moving to his belt. "I think you've said what you came to say, Sheriff. Time for you to leave my property." "Not quite." Blackwood pulled a folded paper from his coat, holding it up. "This is a summons. There's going to be a town meeting tomorrow night at 7 o'clock in the church hall. The good people of Silver Creek are going to discuss whether it's appropriate for an accused murderer to be living among them, whether certain arrangements should be allowed to continue." He looked directly at Eva, and his smile returned. Different now, predatory, triumphant. "I expect to see you both there, and I suggest you come prepared to explain yourselves, to defend your choices, because if the town decides that this woman is a danger to the community—" He paused for effect. "Well, I'll have no choice but to remove her from your custody. For everyone's safety, of course. Can't have a killer running loose in the countryside." "You can't do that." Silas stepped forward, anger hot in his chest. "I claimed her fair and square, by your own rules, by the arrangement you set up. My rules were meant to give these women a chance at redemption." Blackwood's voice dripped with false sincerity, syrupy and sick. "A chance to become useful members of society instead of criminals awaiting execution. But if a woman refuses to be redeemed,
if she continues to spread vicious lies and make wild accusations against honest citizens, if she shows no remorse for her crimes. He shrugged. Well, maybe hanging was the right choice after all. Maybe mercy was wasted on someone like her. Ava went pale, but she didn't back down, didn't retreat. "I'll be there," she said quietly, "and I'll tell them the truth, all of it. Oh, I'm counting on it."
Blackwood mounted his horse, looking down at them with undisguised contempt. "I'm counting on you telling everyone your little fantasy about how I killed your husband and tried to force myself on you. About how poor, innocent Eva was just defending herself." He leaned forward in the saddle, his smile widening. "And then, I'm counting on them seeing you for exactly what you are. A fat, desperate liar who will say anything to save her own skin. A woman who murdered her husband in cold blood and now wants to drag down a good man's reputation to cover her guilt." He wheeled his horse around. "Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. Don't be late. I'd hate to have to come collect you." The riders galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and the echo of hoofbeats and the taste of threat in the air. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then Eva's legs gave out. Silas caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her against his chest as she shook with silent sobs, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. "It's over," she whispered into his shirt. "He's going to win. He always wins. And this time he'll make sure I hang. He'll make sure everyone watches." "No." Silas's voice was fierce, harder than she'd ever heard it. "No, he won't." "You can't promise that. You don't know." "Watch me." He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. "We're going to that meeting, both of us. And we're going to stand in front of that town and tell them the truth about what Blackwood did, about who you really are." "They won't believe me." Eva's voice was hollow with despair. "They didn't believe me 9 months ago. They won't believe me now. Blackwood will twist everything I say. He'll make me look crazy, dangerous, and then they'll believe the girls." Silas took her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Rose and Violet remember what you did for them. They remember the blanket, the song, everything. And everyone in that town knows my daughters, knows they don't lie. When they tell the story of what you did, when they tell everyone that you nearly died, saving their lives, Blackwood will say I'm using them." Eva's voice cracked. "He'll say I've manipulated them, convinced them of something that never happened, twisted their memories to serve my lies." "Let him say it." Silas's grip tightened gently. "The truth is on our side, Eva. And sometimes that's enough." He was quiet for a moment. "And if it's not, then we run. We take the girls and the horses, and we disappear before Blackwood can stop us. Start over somewhere new, where no one knows us, where no one cares about what happened here." "You'd do that?" Eva stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You'd give up everything? Your ranch, your home, your whole life? For me?" "In a heartbeat." Silas said it simply, like it was obvious. "You and those girls are my life now. Everything else is just things, just land and buildings. None of it matters without people to share it with." Ava made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You're crazy. You know that? Absolutely out of your mind." "Been called worse." Silas managed a small smile. They stood there on the porch for a long moment, holding each other while the morning sun climbed higher and the sheep bleated in their pastures, and life on the ranch continued around them like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The countdown had started. Tomorrow night at 7, they would face the town, face Blackwood, face the truth or whatever twisted version of it he decided to tell.
And whatever happened, there would be no going back. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She tried, lay in the bed and stared at the ceiling and counted her breaths and did all the things that were supposed to calm a racing mind.
But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Blackwood's face, heard his voice promising that she would hang, felt the ghost of rope around her throat. Finally, she gave up and went downstairs. The kitchen was dark except for moonlight streaming through the windows. Eva sat at the table, her hands folded in front of her, staring at nothing. "Can't sleep?" She jumped at Silas's voice, her heart hammering. He stood in the doorway in his nightshirt, hair tousled from sleep. "Sorry. Didn't mean to startle you." "It's fine." Eva's voice came out shakier than she wanted. I can't stop thinking about tomorrow. About what happens if they don't believe us. If Blackwood wins." Silas moved to sit across from her, his presence solid and grounding in the darkness. "Then we face it together, whatever comes." "You keep saying that." Eva looked at him, really looked at him. "Like it's simple. Like standing beside me won't destroy your life too." "Maybe it will." Silas met her gaze steadily. "Maybe Blackwood will turn the whole town against me. Maybe I'll lose everything. But I'd rather lose everything standing up for what's right than keep everything by staying silent while an innocent woman hangs." "You don't know I'm innocent." "Yes, I do." The certainty in his voice made her breath catch. "How? How can you be so sure?" "Because my daughters are sure. Because I've watched you with them for 4 days now, seen how gentle you are, how patient. Because you could have run that first night, and you stayed. Because—" He reached across the table and took her hand. "Because when I look at you, I don't see a murderer. I see someone who's been fighting to survive for so long she's forgotten what it feels like to live." Eva's eyes filled with tears. "What if I don't know how anymore? What if I'm too broken to be worth saving?" "Then we'll figure it out together." Silas squeezed her hand. "One day at a time. 1 hour at a time, if that's what it takes." They sat in silence for a moment, hands joined across the table. "I'm scared," Ava finally whispered. "I'm so tired of being scared." "I know." Silas's voice was soft. "But you're not alone anymore. Whatever happens tomorrow, you're not facing it alone." The fever came without warning. They'd gone to bed late, all of them exhausted from worry and planning for the town meeting. Silas had finally convinced Ava to try to rest, promising they'd face everything together in the morning. But just after midnight, Silas woke to the sound of coughing. He found Rose in her bed, her small body shaking, her face flushed and hot to the touch. "Papa," she whimpered, "I'm cold. Why am I so cold?" By the time he got her wrapped in blankets, Violet was coughing too. Both girls burning with fever that seemed to climb by the minute, their skin hot as coals, their eyes glassy and unfocused. Ava appeared in the doorway in her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. "What's wrong?" "Fever." Silas was already moving, gathering cloths and water, both of them. "I need to ride for the doctor." "No." Eva's voice was firm, certain. "It's too far. By the time you get back, it could be too late." "I know what to do. My mother was a healer. I learned from her." "Are you sure?" Eva was already rolling up her sleeves, moving to Rose's bedside. "I'm sure. Get me cold water, clean cloths, and any willow bark you have. Move." They worked through the night together, Silas running back and forth with water and supplies, while Eva sat between the girls' beds, bathing their burning skin with cool cloths, holding them when they thrashed, singing that old melody over and over,
because it seemed to be the only thing that calmed them. But as the hours wore on and the fever refused to break, the girls began to mumble, disjointed words, fragments of memory, things that made no sense to Silas, but seemed to mean everything to Eva. "The snow," Rose whispered, her eyes glazed with fever. "So much snow."
Mama's not moving. Why isn't Mama moving? We have to stay warm, Violet moaned, turning restlessly. Have to hold on. The lady said help is coming. She promised help is coming. Eva's hand stilled on the cloth she was wringing out. "The stars are so pretty," Rose said, tears streaming down her fevered face. "She's singing about the stars. Don't stop singing. Please don't stop." "The blanket's green," Violet mumbled, "soft and green and warm. But she's shaking. Why is she shaking? She gave us the blanket. She's not wearing the blanket anymore. She gave it to us." Eva went white as fresh snow. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, I remember." "Eva," Silas started, but she wasn't listening. She was staring at the twins with wide, horrified eyes, her hands trembling. "The storm." Her voice was barely audible. "I remember the storm. I was traveling, trying to get to the next town before the blizzard hit. But I didn't make it. The snow came too fast, too thick. I took shelter under a tree, and then—" She pressed her hand to her mouth. "Then I heard crying. Children crying. I followed the sound and found them. 2 little girls huddled together next to an overturned wagon, next to a woman who wasn't moving." Silas felt his heart stop. I knew the woman was dead. Eva continued, tears streaming down her face. "I knew she was already gone, and the girls would be too if I didn't do something. But I only had 1 blanket, just 1, and the cold was—" She broke off, sobbing. "I gave it to them, wrapped them up as tight as I could. I sang to them because I didn't know what else to do. Because they were so scared, and I needed them to stay calm, to stay awake, to hold on just a little longer." "How long?" Silas asked, his voice rough. "How long did you stay with them?" "Hours," Ada's voice cracked. "Maybe 3, maybe 4, I don't know. Until I couldn't feel my hands anymore. Couldn't feel my feet. Until everything started going black at the edges, and I knew if I stayed any longer, I'd die there with them." She pressed her hands to her face. "The last thing I remember is lying down next to them, trying to keep them warm with my body because I didn't have anything else to give. Singing that song one more time, and then nothing. I woke up days later in someone's barn, half dead from exposure." She looked at Silas, her expression shattered. "They're real. They survived because I gave them my blanket and my warmth and everything I had left. And then I forgot. How could I forget? How could I forget saving them?" "The head injury," Silas said quietly. "You forgot because your brain was trying to survive. But Eva—" He moved to sit beside her, taking her shaking hands in his. "You didn't forget the part that mattered. You gave up everything to save 2 children you'd never met. You nearly died doing it. That's what matters. That's who you are." "She's so cold," Rose mumbled from the bed. "Don't be cold, lady. Take the blanket back." "Can't," Violet whispered. "Can't take it back. It's ours now. She gave it to us." Eva made a broken sound and buried her face against Silas's shoulder, her whole body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded. He held her while she cried, held her while his daughters burned with fever and remembered the night a stranger had loved them enough to freeze. Dawn was breaking when the fevers finally peaked and broke.
Both girls opened their eyes, clear and focused again, soaked with sweat, but alive, conscious, safe.
"Papa," Rose whispered, "what happened?"
"You were sick, baby girl." Silas brushed her damp hair back from her forehead. "But you're going to be okay now." Violet's eyes found Eva, who was still sitting between their beds, exhausted and tear-stained. "You stayed with us," Violet said softly, "just like in the snow." "Of course I stayed." Eva's voice was hoarse.
"Where else would I be?" Rose reached out with a small, certain hand and took Eva's. "We saved each other," she said simply. "That's what families do." Eva's breath caught. She looked at Silas, who nodded slightly. "Yes," Eva whispered, pulling both girls close. "Yes, my darlings. That's what families do."